Roomy zoomy.
Roomy Zoomy. Um, my students are probably, if they're here, they're probably a little disappointed that I'm not in my office, which has my exercise bike. Um,
Ooh.
yeah, for this, I came out to where, the books were, because,
It makes you look booky.
makes me look booky.
Well done.
That's what I was going for.
Can you do this at some point?
Actually, what I do is take them off and twirl them around.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Or chew on the end. That also looks very professorial.
Yeah. No, that's good.
You don't
That's
smoke a pipe.
good.
So this is chapter 1 of How I Learned to Hate in Chicago, a little taste of how it opens.
How I Learned to Hate in Ohio. How I Learned to Hate in Chicago is a whole nother book.
That's a sequel.
My parents bought an old farmhouse when we moved here. It's ancient. Built in 1876 with the weird brownout wiring to prove it. You buy a house this old, you're a person happy to inherit problems, which is fine for the owners. Screw them, right? They deserve the problems. The crappy furnace, the inefficient ventilation, the wasp in the attic. It's less enviable for the kids of those people. No one knows what we deserve. I was the farthest kid out on the bus route. You would think that since I was the first kid picked up that I would have my choice of seats, but thinking that shows you're a fool. There's never a blank slate in a town this size, or any town, or anywhere. Live anywhere long enough and you become a person happy to inherit your own problems. I had a socially assigned seat, third row from the front, left side. Only once have I ever not sat in my seat. That didn't work out so well. We rode against the traffic. We were eastbound and everything was mostly clear. Every once in a while, a Volkswagen Cabriolet, Nissan Leopard, or Maxima, or maybe a Volvo 780. I saw a Volkswagen Thing once. Westbound, on the other hand, was practically standstill. People driving to the factory. Their cars were composed of the palette of rusted out American. Falcons, Rampages, Darts, Meteors, Lasers, and Hondas, which weren't American cars but were products of our town. The westbound cars had defensive bumper stickers. Don't laugh, it's paid for. Don't laugh, at least it runs. Don't laugh, your daughter might be in here. The eastbound people were all college people, like people of the college. Rutherford College in town. At one point last year, the cover model of Time magazine's report on the absurd cost of private colleges was the most expensive college in the US in 1984 to 1985. After that report came out, applications to the college rose 15%. The bumper stickers on the eastbound cars advertised better colleges, Dartmouth, Oberlin, Middlebury. The town was founded by limestone barons of the 19th century. It was originally called Mingo, which was what whites called the Mingwe, which was what the Eastern Algonquins called the Iroquois-speaking tribes that moved here in the 18th century. Then Rutherford B. Hayes was born here and became president in 1877, and it was renamed Rutherford in his honor, even though you think it should have been named Hayes. Accuracy in naming things isn't necessarily a strong suit in this part of the country. So I'll just stop there.
Well, I mean, so there's so much there. To me, it is the most glorious setup for a book because, first of all, let's talk about the naming of things. I mean, I love that it initially starts with why things are named certain ways, why things are inaccurately labeled certain ways, the assumptions that we make. And, this book gets into a lot of that. It gets into consistently that proprietary ownership feeling that, white upper class people feel and naming things, and you get into that throughout the book. And would you remind me again of those great 2 words that you and I talked about, where it's why don't you pronounce things the way they should be? Why don't you say Van Gogh instead of Van Gogh?
Right.
What are those 2 words?
It's exonym, which is what other people call you, and endonym, which is what you call you. It's why we call like Germany instead of Deutschland.
Right.
It's this sort of absurdity where we name other countries what's easy for us to say rather than what their name is.
Yes. And what is your character's mislabeled name that he has had to deal with since what, sixth grade?
Sixth grade, yeah. He's named, and I'm going to say a word that is definitely not a word
We should use.
that we use anymore. Just so you know, like, and that's part of what this book was about sort of reckoning with the fact that a word that we don't use anymore was part of like the daily fabric of a lot of our lives. And
Yes.
so the main character is named Baruch by his parents. Barry is what he wants to go by, and everybody at school, including some of the teachers, call him Yo-Yo Fag.
And just real quick, can you explain why the story behind that?
He didn't share his yo-yo once, and immediately got labeled that, and he's been living with it for 4 years now.
Yeah.
And he really hoped that in high school he could be named something else, but it traveled with him. So
And to me, that also gets into another larger theme of this book, which is when you're in a small town like that, or even a medium-sized town, but you're with the same kids, that you become a person and you never can change that person that you were. If you threw up on your pants in third grade, in 10th grade, you're still called
pukey pants.
Pukey pants. I was just supposed to say pukey pants. That totally did not happen to me, and
Yeah,
I don't
right.
know where that
Okay,
came
you
from. But this is a town, that has, as you say, a school called, Rutherford College, which is like, why was it Rutherford College instead of Hayes? Well, obviously because Rutherford probably sounded a little fancier when they named it. And yeah. And that idea, what it gets into, that so the town's main industry is making parts of Honda Accords. Is that right? Not the whole thing, or
making the whole thing, making the Honda Accord. Yeah.
making the whole thing. And the idea that they were trying to promote made in America, even even though it's Honda, they misnamed it. So those themes go all the way through of how we're American. I mean, truly, like the core of America, and how important names are and words are, and that idea that I think that, oh, thank you. I just got a new Diet Coke. um, and here's a town trying to be USA, making Honda Accords, and you either work at the Honda Accord factory or you work at Hayes. So there's already this kind of towny rich person dynamic that's very strong in this book. And can you tell me a little bit about Barry's, I'll call him Barry. I think
let's call him Barry. That's what he wants to be called.
That's what he prefers, so I'm going to call him what he prefers.
Yeah.
Barry's parents and what they do for a living, because that comes into this whole theme.
So his dad is an adjunct professor at Rutherford, and so everybody treats him like a professor except his paycheck. So and his colleagues don't treat him like a professor, and instead he's just sort of slogging away doing intro after intro class, while still holding on to the dream of being an academic, because he's invested too much at this point to sort of let it go.
He has a a thesis that they use to hold up in Windows. That's so thick, it's like 600 pages.
Yeah.
And can you say, can you explain for our audience what the hell he is writing about? Because it is so academically, profoundly specific
Yeah.
that I think it deserves a call.
He analyzes translations of Nietzsche. And so he sort of writes out on his little chalkboard all the different like diagramming sentences, both in the original German and in the different American translations. And that's sort of what he's an expert in, is other people's translations of Nietzsche's work.
Right. Yeah. And again, getting into the play of what words mean and what we do to words, which I love. And what does his mom do?
Oh, his mom works for Marriott and she travels the world sort of establishing Marriotts everywhere.
Yeah.
And she's gone. She's gone most of the time.
Right.
She's an absentee mom.
And
who
he's
pops
kind of
in.
an absentee dad.
Yeah, he's just clocked out.
Yeah.
Barry's parents are definitely not the most attentive parents.
Right. A lot of free range back in the days of free range kids. He was
Right.
even beyond free range.
Yeah.
And his world suddenly changes when a new kid comes to town, and he's a Sikh. And he walks onto the school bus. He has a turban, he's and fully owns it and is fully himself. That, I mean, this is a kid, at a time where, at an age where most kids are still trying to figure out who they are, what they want to be. I mean, I remember I was recently rereading some of my high school diaries where I was literally writing down, and my diary is called George, I guess, just to make it more, more friendly. Because of course.
Dear George.
And it was, dear George, like, I'm really trying to decide, like, do I do my hair like this, like the popular kids do, or do I dress more like a businesswoman, like my mom? Which neither of those worked out.
Yeah, no.
Neither of those worked out. But meanwhile, this wonderful guy comes in. He's been moved from place to place by his dad. And can you tell us a little bit about that? Because these two come together in such a specific and life-changing way for our narrator.
Yeah. Gerbach sort of shows up on the bus and they become pretty close friends kind of immediately.
They become close immediately because poor Barry is in his popularity assigned seat, and our friend sits down, right next to them, so they're already two kids sitting side by side, which was
in an empty bus.
Yeah. Yes. But this kid just launches in.
Yeah. Gerbach is a character I think a lot about when I was growing up. I was this kid who became friends with the foreign exchange students a lot. In my theory now is
were there a lot of exchange students at your school?
Weirdly enough, there were.
Okay.
I can't imagine how depressed they were when they showed up on an exchange trip to America and they ended up in Central Ohio. But I remember
the Statue of Liberty. Where's the Hollywood sign? What's
you can take you to the quarry. Can drink beers on the trestle. And so I think I became friends with foreign exchange students because I think they thought I must have been one too.
Is that how you felt? Really?
Yeah, that's how I felt. Like, because I always just seemed like newly showed up at the school. And so I remember we had.
Real quick, were you just, I'm so interested in how you grew up, because this book is so incredibly relatable. Like, I had a little PTSD reading it because I was back as a kid in high school in the 80s immediately. So I want to hear a little, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I would
Oh,
do want
it's
to hear a little bit about, were you one of those kids where you're with the same kids from kindergarten on up,
oh yeah.
or okay.
Yeah, the big change was in high school when the kids from St. Mary's, the Catholic school, only went up to 8th grade. And so suddenly we had an influx of Catholic kids. But that was about the biggest change we ever got.
Wild, that's wild stuff.
Yeah.
Excuse
I,
me, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
it's okay. Yeah, I grew up, I was just, I was, the name that Barry gets called, I was actually called when I was in high school. And what I remember, I wasn't called it for very long, but I remember going to like this beloved teacher to tell him about it. And I told him that I was being called yo-yo fag, and he burst out laughing. He just thought it was the funniest thing. And I was just like, no.
Oh, were you crushed? Were you able to find any sense of humor, or was it just awful?
I was pretty crushed.
Yeah.
I mean, I laughed with him. I was like, yeah,
Thanks for the
yeah,
help.
yeah, that's great.
Great.
Um, but yeah, and so I think about those times a lot of being sort of like this proto-human, where you're not, with acne, with your body changing all the time, like you really don't know what you're going to look like from day to day.
Yeah.
Like that slow boil of acne, where you just, even in the middle of the day, you could look totally different
It's
because acne just ravaging you. Um, and so, yeah, that's sort of where the book came from a lot, was those experiences. Um, and I remember clearly this Brazilian kid, Engels. Um, he was such a big personality, and we were really good friends. And I remember seeing sometimes the things he didn't see, which was like people looking at the brown boy and giving him the looks and just being like, Engels, come back, come back. be,
right,
be
right.
quiet, quiet. They're watching. Um, and I think that's where a lot of this idea of the book came from, is this idea of whiteness as complicity. And this idea that
Yeah.
uh, it doesn't matter who you are as a white person. You have at some point been in a situation where somebody says the shit around you, and you don't know how to react, so you don't.
Yes.
And you're tacitly giving permission. And that's what Barry does. Barry has no ability to stand up for himself or anyone else. And so he gets dragged into this pretty toxically. I remember from those times from like 85 to 91, where it was the acceptable people that we could hate went from gay people to Muslims.
Yeah.
And it just sort of swung like that, where like the mid 80s was all about homophobia. And not that it stopped, but I remember all of a sudden Islamophobia came about during the first Gulf War, and it just being awful. But I could also imagine those kids who had been picked on a lot, who would be kind of happy that somebody else was being
a little relief.
a little relief, yeah, and how guilty that happiness must have made them.
Yeah.
To feel like, I'm not at the bottom of the pile anymore. I'm so sorry that you are.
Yeah. But also a dash happy.
Yeah.
This book has a lot to do with that idea of complicity and where is the line between active hate and passive hate. Um, there's that amazing moment on the school bus where Barry is watching the guy with the dog. There's a guy walking a dog and it stops and it won't go. There's a train coming and it's freaked out. And he starts, basically beating the dog, and everyone's, Barry's kind of watching, wishing someone would do something. And, ultimately the school bus driver who's angry gets down and, yells at the guy. He picks up the dog, throws it over his shoulder to carry it, and then the dog starts licking him.
Yeah.
And it's a moment for Barry that kind of returns, but to me, that's, again, it's like the relief of not being beaten,
Yeah.
the relief of someone else is getting it. And to me, it was such a horrifying and touching scene, and that type of feeling resonates throughout the book, that idea of how we become complicit in hate,
Yeah.
where that line is again, between that passivity and actually doing something. And certainly that starts to come to play with the friendship between Garbash and Barry.
And also like the idea of like the how disturbing it is that the dog licks the guy.
Right,
Right? Like
right.
it's like you should bite him. This
Yeah.
is logically you should bite him. But he licks his abuser.
And that's the part that's the most disturbing part for me also. That was the part that really hit me in the gut because, you feel that, you see that all the time in different
Yeah.
situations in life, and certainly, in this town, where there's such a line between rich and poor, between whites and people of color, between people who work at the factory and people at the college. um there is so much there, that idea of you know letting things go, and what examining really your conscience. And certainly right now that really resonates.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, as you were writing it, I mean, obviously you were kind of writing it, during these tumultuous past years. And did the writing change for you at all? Did it what was happening in the real world affect any pieces of the novel or the writing of it?
Um, I mean, definitely, without a doubt. I sort of finished this book up a year and a half ago. So before the George Floyd um, protests, and before George Floyd was assassinated by the state. Um, and it's one of the things that I'm often surprised at is that white writers don't tackle racism more than they do, um, as if it's some sort of privilege to be able to not um, talk about racism, not talk about the things that don't affect you. Um, when of course they do. They stunt everyone's soul. Um, and so I was interested in somebody who is being indoctrinated um, into that dirty bargain of being an American, of what you stand up for and what you let slide.
Mhm. Yes.
I remember when I was a kid, I was in 4-H. Um,
Woo!
and woo, yeah, you
I
too?
remember. Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
4-H, hands, heart, health, something. And I went to 4-H camp in
Whoa.
like super rural Ohio. And I was in 4-H for like bunnies and like training dogs. And so I went to this 4-H camp, and it rained one day, And so we all were stuck in our cabins, and our counselors, 17-year-old rural Ohioans, just told us racist and sexist jokes for 3 hours.
Wow.
And that, I mean, that was, yeah, that was how we occupied our time. And just being sort of like inundated with this nonsense. And as a kid, feeling like this is wrong, but having no ability to say stop.
Mhm.
Because, yeah.
Well, especially at that age. I mean,
Yeah.
at that age, there is such a deep fear. I mean, you're already trying to figure out who you are.
Mhm.
And on top of that, there's that fear that someone else is going to label you as the wrong thing, and
Yeah.
it's never going to go away.
Yeah.
You and I were talking about um, that idea that this book is so much about class and class mobility, um, and that idea that in so many towns, and only more so today, the idea of success in many towns is getting out.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely grew up in a town that if if you were going to be called a success, you had to leave. Um, and that almost like the college track kids were already packing their bags to get out of the town. Um, and I think about that now, because where I grew up is such a, battleground state. And I just think about all of these kids who just abandoned, right? It's
Yeah.
like this brain drain that happens to the cities where the best and brightest, the creative kids all sort of run. Um, and that wherever they go, they don't necessarily get into a different class. It's not class mobility we have. We just have mobility that we can drive into another town and start again with this idea of having a clean slate when that just doesn't exist.
Right. I mean, I mean, for me, what kind of hurt my heart when I was reading the book is thinking about all. I mean, these characters are so beautifully written. I mean, even the shitty ones. Can I say that?
Yeah, sure. I think I said shit earlier. So,
Okay, cool.
yeah.
Um, you know, that they're also well written, that they really, I know these people, like I feel them in my bones. And I was really thinking about where these people would be today.
Right.
Um, and that idea that even if they even if they leave town, wherever you go, there you are. And
Right.
particularly even more so today, that idea of, looking at this, 40 years later, I can't do math, but
Yeah. So,
um, they're they could be in any town, throw a dart at the map, and they're still going to have that same life
yeah.
because of just it's only become more limited, and the kind of jobs you can do, the class you can get. Even if you go to college, you're way down by student loans. That it's the American dream. We need to just stop saying that word almost, because we're only losing more so that ability to remake yourself in any
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
Uh,
Which maybe shouldn't be there. This promise of remaking yourself,
yeah,
this idea that you can be severed from history, is sort of part of the problem. This idea that you can go somewhere and be someone totally new, um, is almost a pathology.
yeah,
Like,
yes,
uh, because you're not going to be someone new. You're just going to be surrounded by people who don't know you
right.
yet.
You may get rid of your nickname at least
Yeah.
from grade school, but that you're and even more so, you're in the same town. You're surrounded by the Walmarts and all the superstores, and it still looks the same. And it's like, okay, here I am. Okay.
Wow.
Here I still am. And I
Yeah.
love how this book really, touches on that. It's this undercurrent, throughout the book. Now the book, I should focus back more on so people know more of the plot of the book.
Oh, right.
Can you describe a little bit about what it means that these two kids find each other?
So it turns out, uh, so I'm not very good at plot. I just want to get that out of the way. And so
Me
because
neither.
of that, I borrowed the plot of Gatsby,
Yes.
because I'm so interested in that book. And I'm so interested in, because I forget always when I'm talking about Gatsby, that Daisy and Tom are parents. And so I was starting to think about, like, Daisy's daughter, when Daisy's gone for weeks and months at a time, like, what is Daisy's daughter doing?
Yeah.
Uh, and so I started to get interested in the idea of a book narrated not by Nick Carraway, the neighbor, but instead by Daisy's daughter. And so I
Amazing.
made it Daisy's teenage son, um, and sort of moved it to Central Ohio. But I
Is
was,
that right? I
yeah,
mean, really?
yeah, I was really interested in this idea of, like, at some point, Daisy's just running out on her life and is trying to make believe that she doesn't have history, that she can just sort of run away. Um, but she's got a kid, man, that she just sort of abandons, for this delusion of whatever love she feels, for Gatsby. Though I'm not positive there's a lot of love there. There's a lot of just delusion. Um, this desire to not be the person you are, but the
Yeah.
person you were. Um, so yeah, that's sort of where the book sort of really, uh, really sort of gained traction for me, is thinking about it as a retelling of Gatsby, um, from the teenager's point of view.
Wow, that's very cool. I love hearing like the process ideas. Did you know that from the start as you were writing, or was that something that kind of hit you along the way, first draft style?
Sort of hit me along the way and sort of, built into it more and more. And I took liberties. I moved things around.
Yeah.
Uh, but I was also interested in a kid who has Tom Buchanan for his dad. Because Tom Buchanan is awful. And so I was sort of interested in what it's like to have Tom Buchanan for your father.
Yeah, so describe a little bit the absentee parents here. That we talked about Barry's dad, but let's get into the other parents that we're meeting.
Yeah. So Gurbaksh, his father, Mr. Singh, um, had a relationship with Barry's mom. I'm not giving anything away.
Yeah.
I already said Gatsby. If you haven't read Gatsby, spoilers.
Yeah.
But
For both. Yeah, now
yeah,
now you've
for
ruined
both. Now I
Gatsby.
screwed up both things. But Gurbaksh's father had had an affair with Barry's mom, in the past, and had been searching for her throughout the United States, and was moving from all these different towns that had Marriott connections, and finally found her. Um, and so they start a relationship, and now mom's gone, not because of her job, but because of her love interest. And Barry's left at home with, spoiling for a fight, Tom Buchanan, um,
Mhm.
who's flawed in so many ways. Um, has more charm available for a waitress at the restaurant he goes to for breakfast than he does have for his son. Um, and so yeah, so the dad, yeah, it just, Mr. Singh and his mom and the dad and the waitress create this weird quadrangle of a relationship um, that doesn't go well.
A love square. It's a
A
love
love square,
square.
a love square, a love polygon.
Yeah. And they invest more of their time in that, of course, than in their children.
Right.
It really is, to me, it really kind of defines, I just feel like as Gen Xers, we are kind of the last of a lot of things. We're the last of being able to communicate by phone, what by cell phone, we're the last of the latchkey, because then it was that kind of weird reversal into helicopter parents.
Yeah.
Um, and this is, that times, a million. So, I really felt that sense of both accidental isolation because of being neglected, but
Mhm.
also this strange freedom, and that last ability to really kind of disappear,
Yeah.
for the day, and make your own rules, which was, both thrilling and horrifying at the same time. Um, and I should mention that Gerbotched, that was um that he's popular, that he
Mhm.
becomes, you know actually, in a way, as we're talking about teenagers trying to find themselves, because he's been moved around so much, and because he's just who he is and knows who he is, um shockingly to Barry, can fit into any crowd at school.
Yeah.
Uh, he's total camouflage.
Yeah. He's got his charm on, like he's weaponized his charm. Like
Yes.
he's so used to being the new kid that he knows how to introduce himself. He knows all the shit people are going to say to him, um, and he's built a personality in response to that. Um,
And
and
how,
he's
talk a bit
impressive.
about how that affects Barry and what that does, because their relationship is, the heart of the book, obviously,
Yeah.
and it's so great.
Poor Barry, Barry gets swept along under the undercurrent of Gerbach's popularity. And so Barry suddenly starts getting invited to parties, um, which he doesn't talk to anybody at. He just finds the TV and watches. Like poor Barry doesn't.
That one. Again, the last of the days before cell phones,
Right.
where if you were alone or feeling awkward, you could look at your phone. I mean, instead you were just kind of wandering and leaning against a door or something.
Right. Flipping through the parents' magazines at somebody else's.
Yeah, Reader's Digest. What's
Yeah.
new?
Just horrible loneliness.
Yeah. Yeah, and so what does that do? What does that do to Barry? What, like, for good or for bad, or what's um kind of, is interesting, because I love the fact that you've made a character that would normally be the foil,
Mhm.
the center character, which, is it's so brilliant.
Yeah. Thanks.
You're
Yeah,
welcome.
Barry doesn't know how to handle being popular adjacent, is sort of how he talks about it.
Mhm.
Um, he goes to these parties and he doesn't really know what to do. He meets a cute girl, but he almost doesn't want to look at her because he's afraid if she's cute, he won't know what to talk to her about. And if she's not cute, he doesn't know how he would react. Um, and so he just doesn't want to look at her at all. Um, and so Barry just, in parties, kids parties, I remember they always got busted, like always,
Always, always.
always.
I
Um,
still have a fairly large scar on my thigh from trying to leap up one of those, what do you call it, a hurricane fence?
Mm,
What are those wire jags that they always have?
yeah.
The top, they have the scrape, trying to drunkenly leap over it, in my super cool 80s mini skirt.
Woo!
Yeah, always busted.
Always busted. And one of the things Barry learns how to do is run. And so he learns how to run home. And like the only skill Barry actually learns in the book is how to run.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It does it for, that's the only skill he's got, is how to make himself not there.
Yes.
And it's both wonderful because it's escape, but it's also just a mark of cowardice. And Barry,
Yeah.
when he finally does get to leave the town, spoiler, it's not a feeling of release. It's instead just a kind of cowardice, of not being able to handle and be in that town anymore.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
it's not a triumph, it's capitulation.
yeah, it's like you've won. You've won.
You won, and now you're off
Yeah,
to another place where you're still going to be you.
yeah.
Unless
Still
you
gonna be you.
I want to talk to just a couple more things and we'll turn it over to Q&A, but you so you know, your second main character, because Kabash is you know, even though there is a first person narrator, he's so real. And I want to talk about your time in India that you spent, and if that had any um reflection in the book, what made it, is that why you chose to make the outsider Indian? Did that have anything to do with it?
Some, I will say, like, I was drawn to telling a story about a Sikh kid, um, because to an outsider, like if you're wearing a turban and you're picked on for wearing a turban, take the turban off if you're an outsider. But
That's what
that's
some kids would do, but
yeah.
he does not care.
And so this is like, to Barry, that's what he would do immediately. He would take the turban
Oh
off.
yeah.
If he could, oh my God, he would take the turban off. But instead, like, there's something about that um, is strength, and is sort of um, like he's both a brown kid, but also a brown kid with a turban. And
Right.
he sort of rocks it. And he's really impressive in that
Oh
way.
yeah. Yeah.
He's just he's a cool kid, man.
I love I love him. I
Yeah.
love him.
I do
Um,
too.
Everything's better when he's around.
Yeah.
It's just you can feel he's so well written that you can feel why the other kids are drawn to him.
Yeah.
You know, I was like, I want to meet this guy. What's he doing? I mean, he's definitely one of those characters again where you think, okay, how old is he now? What's he doing? I want to know.
Yeah.
And then uh,
Like,
you're
one of the things for, I
fascinated
think,
by him.
Barry is, um, he's been made fun of and called gay for so long that in some ways he can't even deal with the fact that he finds Garbaksh beautiful. Like, he doesn't sort of have the ability to recognize beauty in another male, because it's been so toxified, weaponized, this idea of being attracted to a man. And so I think about that a lot, like for those kids growing up in the 80s, where that, right, like to be called gay was a death sentence. and what that meant. That if you love someone of your own gender, you're courting a death sentence, and what
Literally.
literally, and what that sort of meant to anyone thinking about their own sexuality. Like, it's been so
Which is what you're supposed to do at that age.
right,
But
which is exactly what you're supposed to do at that age, but instead it just becomes a non-starter. Like, you can't even acknowledge that you find another person of your gender attractive, because to do so not only courts social death, but also is courting the gay plague, as it was called.
right, right, which does have its own, through line in this book. It's, that kind of at the early days of AIDS and trying to figure it out. But so it is very much there. But I was thinking that idea of, like you said, when men the one thing, like when men drive me crazy, where it's like, well, I mean, I don't know if he's handsome. I'm not gay. Like, still today, it's
Yeah,
like, you do know if Brad Pitt is handsome.
right.
You do know that.
You know that, right?
It's an empirical situation, like, or when you, um, little less so now, but still, when two guys go to a movie theater and put
Oh,
the
yeah,
space between them and the
yeah,
seat, so that we make sure that for all of us who don't give a shit, um,
yeah. We
you
know.
know,
Yeah,
like, that it's still there. And it's so, it's again, it's that feeling in this book that you just captures so perfectly. um I promise everyone I'm about to go to Q&A, but I have two more things. First of all, this book just, um again, it deals with such intense and important subject matter, but it's also freaking hilarious. And it just, to me, captures, um God, it captures what it was like. Did you keep a journal when you, or a diary when you were a kid, that you were able to look back on? Because it nailed certain things that I really was like, oh God, I remember that.
yeah,
Oh, I remember,
yeah.
Or
Well, you know,
are you just someone who just, I mean, I personally can regress incredibly quickly to my childhood.
yes.
Doesn't take a problem at all. So I didn't know if that's, if you were like that.
Um, the my last book was about my amnesia. Like, I had amnesia, um, and so one of the things that I had to consciously do when I was recovering from that was to actively cultivate memories. If I even got a scrap of a memory that flitted through, I would sit with it intentionally and try to flesh it out as much as I could. And this book is definitely an outgrowth of my sort of recovery from that amnesia, to own those memories again, to feel like an integrated personality again. Um, and so a lot of that stuff just comes from
Mhm.
trying to sit with those memories as much as I could,
Practicing memory.
practicing memory.
Your
Yeah,
case, practicing memory.
yeah.
David's first book is The Answer to the Riddles of Me, and everyone should buy it. Just wanted to throw that in there.
I agree.
Yeah. Oh, good. Would have been so awkward if you were, skip it.
Man,
Um, I want you to read like two quick things,
okay.
just so people get the idea of just these moments that just, for me, were so great. So can you, I mean, again, everyone, these are just gonna be quick paragraphs, so you get an idea of just how lovely this writing is. Can you go to page 21, my friend?
Okay.
And I just want you to read just that that first paragraph.
It was in seventh period when the speaker came on. It was during band. I was third chair trumpet. There were four of us. I sat next to Flossie Beckley, a girl so heartbreakingly beautiful that I'd gladly collect and ferment the leavings of her spit valve and drink down the resultant wine. We were sight reading a Sousa piece when the voice came on.
I love it. I love it. I remember those crushes. I remember like whatever I can get from you, I will take.
We'll take.
I would take. Also, just so people get an idea of Garbage, because I just think this just does it. Page. Wow, my glasses aren't working. Page 55. Can you read starting from I was quiet?
I was quiet. I was a creep. But now that's what people expected of me, what they wanted from me. And it's not like I needed to talk anyway. Gary was always in motion, always performing, always entertaining. He stood out, brown skinned with his head wrap and top knot, a version of the Sikh turban called a patka, but he stood out mostly for how he blended in. He was fluent in click, if that's possible. His brownness and his turban gave him a pass. It seemed that everyone embraced him because he wasn't a threat. Not one of the black guys with their loud music no one understood and everyone was afraid of. Not one of the future farmer white guys with their weary, I helped a horse give birth before I came to school look. Not one of the D&D guys with their black shirts and obscure references. Not one of the pretty girls who always seemed so nervous, as if they were playing high-risk poker, wary that someone had seen their hand. Gary was his own clique, and I was Gary's best friend. Everyone loved Gary Singh.
I mean, it's so good. And everyone should just read the book. I'm not gonna pick anymore because I have this thing like dog-eared and starred, and because I like to use my books.
Yes.
And there's so many like dog-eared pages, things underlined. I mean, truly, like, just these moments. But the last thing I want to talk about, which I'd love to get into, is the Challenger. They at the height of these two sets of parents and another set of parents who are all at various degrees of responsibility and care for their children, end up all together in a hotel room as they're watching the Challenger, which for those that don't know was a horrific disaster. They had a teacher who was going up into space named Krista McAuliffe. So it was a very big deal. It was going to be, the first teacher in space, and they were trying to, again, grow America and yay America, and we're going to get there first. And there are all these reasons that they should not have done it, but they did it anyway. There's all these safety issues. And again, it reminds me of, that idea of image and how important, like, oh, we know this might be risky, but boy, the TV is on and we got to do it. And what it reminds me of, David, is a moment in E.L. Doctorow's Book of David. Such a great book. Okay. And there's that set piece that at first seems completely almost random, where all of a sudden in this very serious book they're at Disneyland, right? That's what this scene reminds me of, which is about the highest compliment I could give to anyone. It's just it's one of those where you start out going, huh? Like, why is this happening? And within two sentences, you're like, oh, yes. And it's just so beautifully written. And I'd love for you to talk just about why you wanted that in the book.
Yeah, I think of, I remember, I mean, for a lot of kids our age, Gen Xers, we were in the classroom and they wheeled the TV in
Right.
so that we could watch it. Um, and I remember watching it explode and not being able to believe it. And it was that first moment of, I, I don't think I'm believing what I'm seeing. Um, and like this collective grief and astoundingness that happened to everybody. I remember in my junior high, I was in 6th grade when it happened. A week later, a kid got suspended for telling Miss Brown that he wished she was on the Challenger.
Whoa.
Which I gotta say, yeah. But it was this idea of the first time I really knew the difference between what we wanted and what we got. And like, and
Yeah.
to me, that feels like such a place that fiction lives in, is like what we wanted, what we thought was going to happen, and what actually happened. And how do we live in the aftermath of what actually happened?
Mhm.
And how do we make sense of the world when what we had been promised, what we were desiring, didn't come to pass at all?
Mhm.
Like they were
And
going
I
to end
mean,
up.
it is a collection. Every single person in that room, grown-ups and kids, are also dealing with their personal, very large moments of what was supposed to happen, what we wanted to happen, and what did happen, like with our lives.
With our lives, right? And instead, you have this giant Y in the sky, this like yawning Y, um, and not knowing what you're going to do when everything lands, um, because it's sort of suspended for a while, and you're like, maybe they're okay.
Oh yeah.
I remember thinking like, oh, they're fine. They're in one of their,
Parachutes. I
yeah,
mean, yeah, you're kids, so it's sort of like, obviously
yeah.
it's gonna be okay because I was promised it was okay.
I was going to be,
And
I was promised
and
it
they
was gonna
wheeled in the damn TV. So yeah.
be, yeah. No, it was it. And then I remember um, the jokes that showed up almost immediately about the Challenger explosion. And I've been fascinated with those jokes since I was a kid because I felt so dirty knowing them. Like yeah. Um, and so that's a big part of the book, is sort of like going into those jokes um, about the Challenger. What
Mhm.
was the temperature of the ocean after the Challenger? 7 below. Like, these aren't witty jokes,
Right.
but they somehow help to make sense of it,
Mhm.
or at least put some control over it in setup punchline, um, that we could distance it far enough away to feel safe.
Yeah. Yeah. Gallows humor, sort
Yeah,
of. That yeah, we package it up.
yeah,
Like we do everything in America. Package it up, put a bow on it,
yep.
um, you know, repurpose it in a new way, re-advertise it. We were also such a our jokes were so violent in the 80s. Like remember what were all the baby, what do you call a baby in a blender or
What's grosser than gross?
those, yeah, yeah. Which I just don't think would, I hope don't fly today, but I don't know.
Yeah.
But that Challenger, it's so beautifully written, David.
Oh, thank
I
you.
can't say enough, and I'm gonna stop saying enough so that we can get to questions. How about that?
Yay. Questions.
Give us some questions.
Give us some questions, Susie.
I got them. They're percolating over here. This one could go to either of you. How do you find time to write with so much going on? So much outer world distraction.
Poorly.
Poorly. Yeah, good. Yes, poorly.
I'm actually waiting for one of my children to peek in at any second and come say hi to everyone.
Yeah.
David,
Yeah.
how did you do it? I mean, you wrote this book before
Yeah.
lockdown, but
Before
you're
lockdown.
also teaching and, how do you, I'll elaborate on the question, how do you get in the headspace? Does it take you, a while to kind of get in the writing mode, or are you able to like do sort of, I'm going to do 3 hours of writing?
Back before COVID, I would need the entire day to sort of languorously sort of get into it. But during
Put
COVID,
your glasses on, do your glasses thing.
oh yeah.
Right.
Um, but now that COVID showed up, especially this summer, I would have 3 hours and I was amazingly efficient. Like suddenly, all of a sudden, I could write very quickly, which I couldn't before in those 3 hours. So that was nice. I don't have that now. I don't have those 3 hours right now, but it was really nice this summer.
Why don't you have the 3 hours right now?
Because of the different restrictions. Like my kids were able to go
Sure,
to
gotcha.
like an aftercare thing.
Cool. Yeah.
And then now they can't. So I don't have those 3 hours anymore.
And you are a parent, unlike the parents in this book, where you actually care for your children and
They're okay.
worry about them.
little-
make sure they're not getting online bullied instead of
Right.
regular bullied.
Right.
And I will say for myself, I must putter about for at least an hour before I write. It will never happen to me to just sit down and write. I have to take piles of things and put them in different piles of things, which is cool. I have to look at piles of things and go like, oh, that has become furniture, and it's a pile of letters or bills from 1982.
I call that writing though.
Oh, good. Okay. This is the process.
Yeah.
Magical process.
Yeah, it's my process. I got to move a pile.
Very busy.
Very busy.
You talked about this one a little bit earlier. When you were writing this novel, did you have any idea how relevant it would be today?
No.
I mean,
But to me it would be relevant no matter when. I feel like these questions of whiteness and these questions of complicity and these questions of homophobia are relevant to America at any point, even if it feels a little bit more pointed now. Like these are things America just doesn't do well with.
Yeah.
This next question from Scott Brown is about the Challenger, which we just kind of talked about. You also mentioned, did you have a journal or a diary to go back to like Gillian did?
No, I didn't have. I have journals and diaries, but I never go to them. I'm afraid of what I'll find, and so I'm too scared.
This one, I like this one from Scott Brown as well. On the subject of the myth of infinite American reinvention, have we fundamentally misperceived or misreceived Gatsby?
Ooh.
Yeah. No, I hated that book when it was introduced to me when I was a kid. Couldn't stand it. Felt too obvious, felt whatever. And now I understand, like I get it now. I feel like I get it. But this idea when it was taught to me was that it was a love story. And like, that's crazy. This is not a love story. This is like, what's stunning about the story, how anti-love story it is in some ways. Like it was taught as a sort of romantic piece when it's absolutely not, in my opinion. It isn't. You get so little about Gatsby and Daisy in the middle of that book. Like they absent themselves from the book. And so we don't actually get to see their love story. And I think that's one of the best parts of the book, is that this isn't a love story. This is something else. This is delusion.
And then this could go
Oh,
for
Real
either.
quick, I have a follow-up question for David. Did you, question Scott Brown, part A. Oh, nice author look, I love it.
Yeah, cool.
Since you knew you were gonna reference, intentionally have some themes of Gatsby, how often, like, did you read it multiple times? Did you read it once just to kind of refresh your memory?
There are specific scenes that I wrote in response to those scenes in Gatsby. And so I would read those scenes over and over again. When I was working construction at one point in my life, I had a teacher, a professor who really loved Gatsby. And I was like, man. So finally I was like, maybe I'll listen to it while I run baseboard for this limited. I was like building a mall store, and so I was running baseboard. And so I listened to Gatsby over and over and over again for like 2
Wow.
weeks, until maybe through Stockholm syndrome, I ended up loving it. But yeah, I sort of, I don't have it memorized like some people do, but I'm pretty good footing on that book.
Do you or Gillian, do you write on a computer or do you write by hand?
Computer.
Computer.
Yeah, for me, like, it's all about getting that messy first draft out. And if I had to do that with handwriting, like, it would be I would have to stop and think too much. And like, in some ways it gets me into the flow quicker by being able to type it, rather than pausing and thinking. Like, I like to shut down my brain as much as I can when I'm writing, to get into that unconscious place.
I do longhand as I go. These are just a few samples.
Nice.
I love the yellow legal pad. I do longhand. Sorry, I have an ice cube in my mouth. That's what writers do. It's like a writer thing.
Yeah.
I do longhand while I'm thinking. Like, I do but it's not technically a first draft, but I'm writing down kind of ideas for what I want to officially write. I scroll down things. I come across, again, as I am rearranging my piles into different places to put off writing, I'll come across things from 10 years ago, and read them and go like, oh, this would have been a cool scene. I wish I had remembered that I wrote it. But then I do my actual writing on laptop.
Got it. All right. Well, I think that covers our chat questions.
Excellent.
Thank you to all the guests tonight
Yeah, thank you.
Everyone. So cool. And again,
yes.
Ohio. Yes.
Puppies at the bookseller. You can email us, you can go to our website, or
and
that's Cellar with a C, CELLAR.
Yeah.
David from the chat.
Thank you.
Yeah, good point. Thank you guys. Have a good night.
Yeah, have a great night.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.